Today we're going to talk about exactly how much it costs to make wine at different stages of the game. So whether you're maybe right out of college, just trying it out, don't have a lot of money, maybe you're in prison, who knows your situation, versus you're starting to scale up, you're starting to give some bottles away to your friends and family, all the way until you're making what will be considered premium professional grade wines. I generally recommend that you do kind of go through the stages because you can easily invest a couple $1,000s only to find that it's just not the hobby for you. When you're just getting started out though, it doesn't really take much. You can make wine from store-bought juices, like you can go get some Welch's grape juice, maybe some Old Orchard apple juice, and at the cheapest level you can ferment right in the jug that it came in. You're just going to need to make some airspace, but I would recommend getting something like a 1-gallon glass jug just to get you started. That's going to run you about $8, and in 1 gallon you can make about 5 bottles of wine. Other equipment you're going to need is an airlock, so it lets CO2 escape without letting air in. It has a little bit of water in it. You're going to need a stopper, some people call it a bung, to put in the top of your little jug. As it comes time to bottle, you're going to need a corker. At this stage, I'd recommend a hand corker where you're looking at about 20 bucks. There was a time these things were like 10 bucks. Now they're 20 bucks. Someday if you're watching this video in 20 years, you can tell me how good we had it at this time. As far as putting the wine in the bottle, if you're just dealing with a gallon at a time, just a little funnel will do the trick. So that's going to cost you about $1. And when we add up all this equipment, you're looking at about in the ballpark of 35 bucks. If you want, you can get another jug. Maybe you're at 45 bucks and you can make a couple gallons at a time. I've actually got some easy entry-level wine just like this going right now. And the juice that I used was Welch's Concord grape juice. It was $8. That's actually kind of at the high end of the price scale. That was 3 quarts for $8. I mean, you can get apple juice for $4 or $5, especially as you get towards the end of the season. Just gonna want juice that is usually pasteurized or just has no real big preservatives. Yeast costs about 99 cents if you're just using the basic stuff. A lot of people use EC1118 when they're just getting started out. For these kind of hillbilly wines we're making here, you're usually gonna have to add a little bit of sugar to it. They're not picking these grapes so ripe that they actually have the sugars needed to make wine. So for a gallon, let's say total, you might need something like a pound of sugar, and that's gonna even include back sweetening as well. If you want your wine to have any sort of shelf life, you're going to need some potassium metabisulfite. You can buy this in the form of little tablets called Camden tablets, and it's about $2 for a 25 pack. So you can figure that's probably going to last you maybe 10 batches of wine. So you're only in that for about 20 cents a wine. Also, I mentioned back sweetening, like these Concords are almost always going to be sweetened. If you're going to do that, you need potassium sorbate, which is going to run you about $3.50 for enough to do something like 10 batches. So you're at about 35 cents a batch there. Corks, about 20 cents a pop. So 80 cents or $1 for a small batch like this. And then I'm not going to count bottles as an expense because they're reusable. And for the most part, you can get bottles for free, especially if you only need like 5. Just talk to your friends and family, tell them to save bottles for you. So when you add all this up, I mentioned you got about $35 in equipment, and you're looking at about $2.80 for this wine. You can easily make a wine for like $2 a bottle. These are gonna be easy drinking wines, but they're not necessarily gonna be like ultra premium wines. They'll be like the wines you get at that winery that you're like, yeah, it's not exactly a good winery, but that wine was tasty, kind of tasted like juice. So at some point, maybe you moved out of your studio apartment, got out of prison, and you're thinking about making a little bit bigger batches and maybe trying to use something besides this store-bought juice. At this stage, maybe you're making 6 gallons at a time. I'd call this the novice level, maybe the mid-grade quality level. Of course, you can make pretty premium white wines at this level, but here's what you're gonna need as a bare minimum. You're probably gonna be fermenting in a food grade bucket at this stage, like a 6.5 gallon bucket, which is good for about a 6 gallon batch. That's gonna cost you about 15 bucks. You're also gonna need a carboy. So these are the big 6 gallon glass jugs. I definitely recommend getting the Italian glass carboy. Some of these other ones have had issues with the bottoms blowing off of them. Also, you can get a plastic carboy, but what I find with those is, one, they get scratched up, two, they kind of hold smells, they could trap bacteria, and three, if you pick them up, it'll just squirt wine out of the top. It's really hard to pick them up when you've got your wine topped all the way up to the very top, like you should be doing if you're aging wine in a vessel like this. You can get these cheap used. If you keep watching, usually you can get them for about 20 bucks. If you're in the market for like 5 or 6 of them, usually you get kind of that bulk pricing. There's a lot of old like water jugs from the 1940s, just old good glass, usually pretty cheap. Although some people ask crazy prices, as you very well know. Still gonna need your airlock and stopper. That's gonna be about 4 bucks. At this point, you're not gonna be bottling with a funnel. You're probably gonna use a racking cane and a little bottling wand. So for a stainless racking cane, tubing, and a wand, you're looking at about $25. That's also gonna be useful for racking as you're transferring wine. You know, as it's starting to settle out, you're moving it from maybe one carboy to another. You can do this all, by the way, with one carboy and bucket. It just requires a back and forth, which is a little more air than you want. So you may want to think about getting a couple carboys. You're still probably going to be using a hand corker at this stage. That's about 20 bucks. You could upgrade to a Portuguese tabletop style corker. Those are great. Those are about 60 or 70 bucks. So you're into it for about $125 to maybe $150 at this mid level, especially if you're making 6 gallons at a time. If you want to make 12, 18, maybe 25 gallons, proportionally scale up from there on the things like really carboys. Those are going to be the things that you need a lot of, because you can kind of make a bucket of wine and then while one's aging, reuse your fermenter as you move along. So at this stage, probably what you're going to be fermenting are these juice buckets. So you can get a bucket of red wine juice, you can get a bucket of white wine juice, be it, you know, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Grigio. The white wine end of things, you can make a pretty premium quality white wine. On the red wine end of things, the best you're gonna do when you're working with these juices is gonna be like mid at best tier. The same goes for the juice concentrate kits. There's kind of a little bit of a limit of how good of a wine you can make when you're kind of using, you know, subpar ingredients. But whether it's a bucket of juice or enough concentrate to do 6 gallons, you're probably going to be around $75. You might find it a little bit cheaper, and of course you could find it quite a bit more expensive if you're buying, you know, the more premium end of things. Yeast is still going to be about $1. So you're probably still buying pretty basic yeast at this point, nothing too exotic. You might not really need any sugar, especially if you're making dry wine. A lot of times these wines are going to come in with in the right kind of range of beginning Brix or starting gravity if you want to work in specific gravity. You're going to need potassium metabisulfite, which $1.99 worth of potassium metabisulfite is probably good for about 2 batches, so that's $1. You're going to need corks. Enough corks for your 30 bottles is going to be about 6 or 7 bucks. And again, we're going to reuse our bottles, and the price per bottle here is going to be pretty comparable to when we were making it at that kind of early level, but your quality might go up just a hair. So I have it at about $2.75 when you add all this up, not including glass. But you're getting a little bit better quality, and especially, like I said, if you're making white wine with the equipment that I mentioned, you can make a pretty premium wine. I've got some videos on how to make white wine from juice, and you don't really want to make it from grapes. You kind of want to press those grapes right off the vineyard anyway. So if you can source good quality juice, you can make good quality white wine with just this equipment that I mentioned here. So now, if you're an extreme hobbyist like me, this is kind of where all your hobbies spiral out of control to. And this is going to be the kind of professional grade level. So this is where you're maybe making 30 gallons of wine at a time. You're sourcing real grapes, good quality grapes from good quality wine regions. You're fermenting on the skins. If you're making these red wines, getting that long skin contact time, even potentially extended contact past fermentation, and you're pressing the grapes with a wine press, and you're making really, really high quality wines, but you're into it for some risk at this point, so I don't recommend you start here. You could blow $1,000 like that if you screw something up. So subscribe to the Home Winemaking channel, watch a ton of videos, and try to figure out all the ways things could go wrong if you're gonna step up to this level. But at this level, what you're gonna need is a way to crush and to stem those grapes when they come in. That could be as cheap as $10 if you're using a milk crate, just squishing those grapes through the milk crate and chucking the stems. But if you get into 500 pounds or more, you're probably going to want a crusher destemmer. Hand crank crusher destemmer is going to cost you about $600. I will mention at this level, it is great to have some friends that are also into making wine. One, you can split these big expenses of this, $600 crusher destemmer that you need for one day. Two, you can get some quantity pricing, so you can get like a pallet of grapes instead of a few crates of grapes. And three, it's just a lot more fun. If you ever have like a huge wine spill or something just is going horribly wrong and you're doing it by yourself, it can be so frustrating. But if you're doing it with friends, you're having a drink, you can laugh it off, and it's usually just takes the sting off of it, I would say, a little bit. Next, you're gonna need a wine press. I personally really like these wooden basket presses. A lot of like top tier wineries use basket presses. You're gonna be into it for a good little bit of money. These things aren't cheap anymore. If you get like a basic apple press style press, which works perfectly great for grapes, the cheapest ones you're gonna get are about $150, and those are not the greatest quality either. As you get into pretty good quality, you're going to be at about $450, and that's still for a small number 25 press. That's going to be pretty good though. I mean, you can run 500 pounds of grapes to that. You're just going to have to press it a few times. No big deal. Just going to have to drink a little bit more beer or wine while you're working on your the wine that you're making there. If you get into the bigger sizes, like a number 40, number 45, you're easily up at $1,000. And if you don't want to deal with the hassles of wood, you want to get into a stainless steel press, you can get a bladder press where it inflates a bladder of water to press those grapes, squishes them against the sides, and you're easily in the like $1,200 to $1,500 range. So you want to be pretty sure you're going to stick with the hobby at that point. I'll put a list in the description, by the way, of everything that I mention here and a good place to buy it. Some of this stuff I'll find might be better to buy at More Wine, while some of it you can find on Amazon. And in some cases, it might be better just to check your local wine shop if you have one, especially if you're dealing with freight shipping. At this scale, for a fermenter, some people use these stainless steel like variable volume fermenters. You really don't need that. You can use like a food grade brute garbage can. They come in 20 gallons. They also come in 32 gallons. I believe they come in like 55 gallons maybe also. You're usually looking at about $35 per brute, and you're probably going to need 1 to 2 of those if you're making something like 500 pounds. I mean, at 500 pounds, you're probably going to want 2 of those. And 500 pounds, by the way, will make about 30 gallons of wine. If you're making white wine, you don't need the crusher destemmer and you don't need the press, so good for you if you're making white wine. You also aren't going to need a punch down tool if you're making white wine, but you will if you're making red wine. And a punch down tool, you're looking at about 70 bucks. You can get away with like a huge serving spoon, like a stainless steel one, and just churn that cap up a few times a day. I sell a punch down tool, but they're pretty much always out of stock. I just really struggle to find a good manufacturer for those. So maybe I'll get those back in stock and you might be able to save a little bit of money if I do. You're going to need a lot more storage than you're going to need at that mid-grade level. So if you're making this scale, you're really not going to do wine from grapes unless you're making like at least a few hundred pounds. So you're going to want something like maybe 3 6-gallon carboys, 3 5-gallons, and 3 1-gallon carboys, which is going to run you like 350 bucks new, maybe 100 bucks used. And you notice I mentioned a couple different sizes, so I didn't say, 5 6-gallon carboys, because the volumes never quite work out exactly like you want. So it's nice to have a few different sizes. You might rack from a 6-gallon and you have what's remaining is maybe a 5-gallon and a beer growler of wine. It's nice to have different sizes because you always want to keep that wine topped up to the neck if you're during that aging period. Still going to need your airlocks, say 20 bucks for the amount of glass that I just mentioned. You're probably going to be using the Portuguese corker or potentially the Italian floor corker. So Portuguese corker, 70-ish bucks. Italian floor corker, easily $150. And frankly, I don't think it's really any better. It's just bigger, it takes up more space. You're definitely going to want a pH meter, and you don't want to skimp on this. You want to make sure you're pretty accurately measuring out to 2 decimal places, because this is a logarithmic scale where a little bit makes a big difference. So I'll put a pH meter in the video description below. You're going to need a gram scale that can measure up to about 100 grams, or you can get away with maybe like 50 grams, but you're going to be in the maybe $15 range for that. At this point, you might actually be buying bottles, because at some point it gets hard to get enough bottles. You can go to like a tasting room and ask them for their bottles, and oftentimes they'll give them to you, but also it can be a kind of a hassle too to clean up all those old bottles. So about 17 bucks a case these days. So let's say you want 10 cases, that's $170. When it comes time to bottle, you can get away with your same rack and cane bottling wand that you used for, when you were just getting kind of on your feet. But I mean, if you're bottling a lot and you're for sure going to stick with the hobby, I would definitely recommend a Enomatic vacuum bottle filler. Those things make it just so much easier. You can just stand up, stick it on, it shuts off when it reaches the top, and it just makes it a little bit more of a joy to bottle. And bottling can be almost one of the most frustrating parts of winemaking, because it's really easy with these really highly sprung vinyl tubings to knock a bottle over, and things just get really chaotic. So if you want to make yourself happy, think about getting one of those bottle fillers, which again, I'll put in the video description. So from an equipment perspective, about the cheapest you're going to be able to do it is about $600 US, up to, maybe $2,000 or $3,000 if you're getting into some decent equipment here, and especially if you don't have some friends to split that cost burden up with. Now let's talk about the cost to make this wine. And I'll tell you right from the start, it's not going to be cheaper, but you're now making incredible wine. At some point, you just don't want that other stuff. You only want incredible wine, and you will be saving a lot of money compared to what you would buy that equivalent bottle at the store for. So when you buy grapes, I mentioned you're going to get a deal if you can buy in volume usually. There's a lot of brokers that are going to charge you a lot of money, more than you need to, which can be a pain at small volumes. We paid, last time we bought grapes, fall 2023, I paid about $1.30 a pound, including freight, for Cabernet Sauvignon from Lodi. Pretty good quality grapes. I just ordered some grapes from Chile at a smaller volume, and I was paying, I think, about $1.75 a pound, and they're probably not as good of grapes. That's just a low volume thing. And when we buy, premium grapes, we're spending easily $3 a pound. So if you're making 500 pounds, you're looking at about $1,000, give or take. For this size batch, you might have like a pound of oak cubes, which is going to run you on average about $35. You're going to probably want some tannin. It's going to be about $2. I often use an enzyme called Lalzyme, which is about $2. You're going to probably have to do some adjusting to the grapes, or at least be prepared to do some adjusting, even if you don't ultimately need to. So you're going to want to have some tartaric acid and potassium bicarbonate on hand, in which case you're looking at, for both of those combined, maybe about $12. You might be using more premium yeasts. I've been really liking, for red wines, this RP15 rock pile yeast, which I think is about $15 for enough to ferment a 500-pound batch of grapes. Still going to need your potassium metabisulfite at about $7, because we're going to probably be working in powders at this point. It's just ridiculous to be crushing up tablets when you're making this much wine. You're going to need corks. That's going to be about $40-ish for 150 corks. You're also going to need malolactic bacteria, especially if you're making a red wine. You're essentially always going to put that through malolactic fermentation. That's going to be about $30. And that's enough to do about 60 gallons, by the way. So you can kind of use half of it, seal the rest of it up, and put it in the freezer, and use the other half of it the next year. When you work this all out, though, so this 30-gallon batch is going to make about 150 bottles of wine, and that's going to run you about $7.25, give or take, per bottle. So frankly, you're going to be hard pressed to find a bottle that inexpensive at the wine store. If you do, it's going to be basically bulk wine, jug wine. It's going to be the discarded garbage, basically, that these wineries didn't want to use. And if you do everything right with everything I said here, you can make a wine that competes easily with a $30 bottle, maybe with a $50 bottle. You're making pretty premium stuff here. If you really like getting in the weeds about winemaking, make sure to check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/makewine, where I often talk about stuff that might be a little bit too kind of niche for YouTube. It just wouldn't get traction. But if you're big time deep into winemaking, that might be the exact stuff you want to know. If I missed some obvious equipment here, make sure to mention it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.